Hello, 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 seniors, class of 2020. Welcome to the AP Lit review today. We're talking about symbolism, ready to jump into that, excited to unpack some things today. And then at the end of this week, we're going to be making a shift and talking about how do we apply all of this knowledge to our writing. And then the next couple of weeks, we're going to be specifically looking at writing skills. So Miss Swisher's class, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Hello to you, Miss Phelps' class. Glad y'all are watching. And Miss Servosky's class from Lubbock, Texas. I don't know if I got that correct, but we are glad y'all are with us, as well as everybody else we've been getting emails from. I'm Susan Barber from Grady High School in Atlanta, Georgia. Beautiful weather here today. Mr. Escobar, how are you?
I'm doing great today. I hope everyone out there is doing just great as well. I'm Carlos Escobar from Miami, Florida, representing Felix Varela Senior High School and those incredible seniors and underclassmen who are hopefully watching us today. And as usual, we're going to begin with actually before the homework. We just want to make sure we're very concerned based on some of the emails we receive that there are still students and perhaps even teachers out there who don't have a firm grasp of all the latest information that has been disseminated. And this website here, this URL, is the place to go. All the latest information. There's there are no secrets. There's nothing out there that Miss Barber I know, or that dynamic, amazing teacher in your district might know that the rest of us don't know. Everything that has been released by the College Board is found in one place, and it's found on that website. And the question that concerned me the most was from a student saying that she couldn't find what type of question was going to appear on this year's exam. Everyone was talking about prose. She was trying to confirm it. So here's where you find that information. And indeed, it is prose, the same type of prose that we've been used to for years now. So if you practice that with your teachers throughout the year, then you can expect more of the same. And the other thing that we want to make sure that we're all uh, putting on our calendars is that May 13th date. That is the day of the English literature exam, and it will take place at the specific time zone that you are in. So I've highlighted those, and notice also that if you have physics 2, you're testing that uh, just before your English lit exam. And if you have European history, you're going to test that right after this examination. So as always, nothing has changed in terms of pacing yourself and building up that stamina and making sure that you have that sandwich ready if you have to go from one test to the other. And remember, this year it is prose. You have 45 minutes to write the actual essay, and then you have 5 minutes to upload, but you're timing yourself. And the worst thing that could happen is you're all wrapped up in the essay, and before you know it, 50 minutes have elapsed and you forgot to upload. You must submit within those 5 minutes after the 45 minutes of writing. We had a meeting yesterday. I'm sorry, Ms. Barber, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you should be practicing and experimenting and, of course, listening to your teacher, but thinking about, am I going to type on exam day? Am I going to handwrite on exam day? I always tell my students exam day is not the day to try something new or try something for the first time. My students wrote an essay earlier this week, and I encouraged them, if you think you're going to type, I want you to type this time. If you think you're going to handwrite, I want you to handwrite this time. We're already practicing out what we're going to do on exam day. And I would encourage you to practice typing or practice handwriting or whatever your teacher is advising you to do. Go ahead and be practicing those things away. We are be practicing those things now. So the more familiar you are on exam day with what you're going to do, that's just going to help you settle in and do your best and be confident. We're 21 school days away from the exam. I think that's right. Yeah, I'm always iffy with my numbers, but I'm removing a chain every day. It's getting shorter and shorter. So we are really committed to helping you. And at this point, just you're ready. You're going to be ready. And we just want you to do your best, feel confident going into the exam.
Absolutely. And as we get closer, I think we're going to speak more about the platform and what
Hmm.
that'll look like. And, again, there are no secrets. As soon as that information is out, we are going to share it with the rest of you. The one thing that we did here, which is important, I think, for students to recognize is within those 5 minutes, you have to upload, you have to hit submit. Once you hit submit, we know that circle, that never ending loading circle that we get sometimes. um, if that is happening and the 5 minutes elapse, you're okay. Don't turn off your computer, don't power it down, don't shut down, don't go to another browser, don't get frightened at that moment. As long as you hit submit within the 5 minutes, even if it takes 20 minutes for the loading process to complete and for that never-ending circle to stop rotating, that's okay. The timestamp is when you hit submit. However, you can't close your browser if it's still going through the upload process. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's something for the teachers listening. Please reiterate that to the students, because we won't be there obviously to help them navigate the system. But let's dive right in. I think that was some important information that we all have to keep in mind. But our homework was with the white heron, and it was Sylvia's mission of climbing this tree and what it represents. And the homework centered on the notion of setting, and that juncture where setting and character meet, and how can one inform the other, namely how can the setting inform the character and the values of that society. We had asked you a series of questions. As always, the answer is to some extent a matter of interpretation. There are answers that are within the field of plausible interpretations, and then there are some that are not. But by no means is this the answer that we are looking for. In fact, many times we're not even giving you the answer. So, what setting details do you think are important? We focus, and you've heard Miss Barber talk about this before. Focus on the beginning and the end. That's not to say that that's where the answer is or that's the only place we look at, but for the sake of these lessons where we're trying to, you know, process information as quickly as possible, the beginning and the end are good places to look at. Um, so important details here is the expanse of the woods and the the height, not just of the land itself but of the trees, the age of the trees, the fact that it was the last of its generation. And then at the end we get um the sea, with the dawning sun making a golden dazzle over it. We had been immersed in jungle, immersed in forest this whole time, and when she finally gets up there and she sees the sea, we get a different aspect of setting. And then the next question we asked is, well, what is the effect of these details, right? And this is where we stop short of providing an answer for you, but we are giving you a spot for you to look at. Where the text says, she stood trembling and tired, but wholly triumphant, high in the treetop. Sorry, my thing was blocking it. High in the treetop, Sylvia felt as if she too could go flying away among the clouds. So you take, the details in that quotation, and I think it's a great launching pad for you to enter uh, the internal um, condition of the character, right? And at that point, you're going to be talking about the effect that the setting has on her. And then when we talk about the values, well, look at the statement where it says, truly, it was a vast and awesome world. For her to experience this setting, for her to have gone through this journey and arrive at that notion, I think is getting to the heart of values. And again, this is where you don't just provide evidence, but you provide commentary. And that is something that you're providing instead of us. But these are, I think, good markers. Ms. Barber, you were going to say
Yeah,
something there?
and I think that, we've talked a lot about contrast. Anytime you can unpack contrast or show contrast, that really helps to frame things up and to show complexity. And so I think here, the setting, we have this contrast, this shift in the setting, and we start in the forest, and then we end up high above, or she ends up high above the trees where she's able to see. So we have this contrast, and what does that mean? Her perspective changes. So the setting not only changes, but this shows a shift in her perspective, and it opens up this large amount of new knowledge for her because her perspective has changed.
Speaking of, that's our topic for tomorrow, right? Characters' perspective. So it might be important to go back to this one and look at that perspective, what how it
That
enriches
was your plug for tomorrow. And
the
yeah, so that's good. And we're going to look at this a little more today as we talk about symbolism. So jumping into that, and I think this is your part. We usually divide out the parts, but we're
well,
becoming. Go
yeah,
ahead.
let's talk about the goal for today. And the goal is very, very direct:
Hmm.
symbolism, something we've been dealing with for years. And I think this is probably one where students do a better job at arriving at function. I think students recognize that it's not just, oh, the star is a symbol, but I think that they're used to fleshing out what the function of that symbol is in a text. And again, the purpose is arriving at a deeper understanding or a deeper interpretation of the text by taking these very literal symbols and understanding the figurative representations that they stand for.
Yeah, I agree that I think students have had a lot of training with symbols from early on. So this is probably one of the easier ones, but we still don't want to overlook it because this is just a great way, another way to dive into that text, have a way in to make meaning. So when we think about symbols, and again, these are very common symbols that you're going to be looking at here. We know that a heart is often a symbol for love, or we know, do you want to go to the next slide? We know that perfect. So like this 4-leaf clover, it's a symbol for luck. Lightning, storm is a symbol for like turbulent times, and a rainbow is a symbol for hope. So all of those, you have a basic understanding already of what a symbol is. So if we define a symbol, it's very easy. It's a concrete object, but it will represent some type of abstract ideas. Now, in a very basic text or setting, we'll see, just like we talked about a minute ago, symbols have very specific meanings. But sometimes, as we dive into more complex text, we see symbols have more room for multiple interpretations. Again, the text we're looking at are often complex. So it's not like we can just assign like one word and say, this is what this means. It has lots of different shades to it. So we will have more room for interpretation, such as light and darkness. Water, fire is often a symbol for purification, but we can see this a lot of times, like in characters, and in a character, their process, their development. So a symbol is, it may not represent like this one specific thing, but it may be a process over a period of time that we're looking at. Now, symbols, this is important to keep in mind. And we'll see this in today's example. But a lot of times when a symbol is placed in the same text as a character, the symbol will represent some type of shift in the character. When the character encounters this symbol, we're going to see a change in perspective or a change in the way of thinking or something about that character development that shifts. So that's an important thing to look for if you encounter a symbol in a text.
I think we oftentimes see that in movies as well, right? Like Rain. How many movies do we have where all of a sudden the character's out there in the rain and there's a change in his or her life? Thinking like Truman Show and um, God only
The
knows, but I'm sure
Notebook.
there's
The
hundreds.
Notebook.
Yeah, you're a fan, aren't you? Yeah.
Well, I don't know, but my students always bring that up. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So, oh, maybe it's not the Notebook. Maybe it's Dear John. Yeah, when they're out there, and I've got to. This would be a good time to catch up on movies. They're out there standing in the rain, kissing, and it just like their whole relationship shifts at that point for sure. Um, Symbols often connect to a central or controlling idea. Again, the purpose is not for an author to just drop a symbol in because they're trying to make this word count or develop a text. It's because it opens up and it expands the meaning even further. So the symbol really almost always is going to point us back to this controlling idea or a central idea in the text. So when you see this object that you know is a symbol, one question to be asking is, how is this related to the controlling idea? What can I learn about this as a central idea? And again, symbols always add meaning, add depth, expand the text, expand our thinking about the text. It's another way for us to enter and think about the controlling idea. So let's look at today's example. First of all, before we look at this, and we're going to go back, we're going to look at the white heron prompt. I love that prompt. So some questions to consider when you're reading a text. What concrete objects appear to be important in a text? So you may be reading something. My students just did the Zenobia prompt, the 2018 prompt, and there's a lot of space in this text spent on a chandelier. So when an author gives that many words, that much space in a text to describe an object, you might want to stop and think, okay, why is there this much time dedicated to this? There must be something important about it. Let's think about, is this a symbol? Could this be standing for something else? How does the character react to this object? What might the object represent? How is the author expanding the meaning of the text through this object or through this symbol? And if the symbol, what does the symbol add to the story that it would be lacking without? That's just another way to frame up the question and think about it. So let's look at today's text, the white heron
And,
text.
and
Go ahead.
before we do that, I think that because a lot of times students are maybe dependent on their teachers to see some of these question twos. If they've read novels in class, novels and plays in class, again, jot them down and go through each one and say what is functioning as a symbol in each of these, and how is the symbol enhancing the text, enhancing our understanding of the character. If you know, that won't take you more than half an hour to go through your books, think about these questions, try to jot down some ideas. But I think you're practicing the skill, and I think you're honing your vision towards the analysis of symbolism, which I think is significant.
Right. And even though some people might say, well, that's focusing on question 3 and we're focusing on question 2, what you're doing is you're training your mind to recognize these things. And it doesn't matter if it's a short story, a poem, or a longer work, it is all the same. We're still training our mind to look for symbols that goes across any genre, any length text.
Yeah, even a movie you watch tonight, catch the
Even a
symbol.
movie.
Absolutely. Catch and then have a conversation about how that symbol enhances the film.
We've been going through during our quarantine and rewatching all the Harry Potter movies. So full of symbols there. So let's look at this text. This is what you dealt with last night. Um, and we're going to think about these questions. What object stands out? Why might this be important? Half a mile from home, hang on a second, half a mile from home at the farther edge of the woods where the land was highest, a great pine tree stood, the last of its generation. When it was left for a boundary mark, or for what reason, no one could, whether it was left for a boundary mark, or for what reason, no one could say. The wood choppers who had felled its mates were dead and gone long ago, and a whole forest of sturdy trees, pines and oaks and maples, had grown again. But remember those transition words, always looking for those. But the stately head of the old pine towered above them all and made a landmark for sea and shore miles and miles away. Sylvia knew it well. She had always believed that whoever climbed to the top of it could see the ocean. And the little girl had often laid her hands on the great rough trunk and looked up wistfully at the dark boughs that the wind always stirred, no matter how hot and still the air might be below. So already just looking at this, we see the beginning of the text. A great pine tree stood, the last of its generation. This phrase, the last of its generation, is just adding. We already have it described as great, but now we're adding more importance to it. And then, it talks, we see that it towers above everything else, and it has become this landmark. So here, and we may not at this point recognize as a symbol, but we know that there's a lot of attention given to this tree, and it's different than the other trees. So we can begin to think, this could be a symbol. I wonder what it might stand for. And then we can see how Sylvia reacts to it. She knows it well. And we see that she had thought about this tree and maybe not the other trees. Like there was something special about this tree because she believed that whoever climbed to the top of it could see the ocean. Now, it doesn't say she knows that, but she believed that. And it says, she laid her hands on the great, here we have this word great again, the great rough trunk, and she looked wistfully up at it. So she would, dreamingly look up at this and think about this tree. So not only do we see the tree in its description, that it's set apart from the other trees, but we see how the character responds to it, that also sets this tree apart. So we know this tree is going to be important.
Right. It's more than just a tree.
It's more than
Right.
just a
I think
tree.
that, yeah.
It becomes apparent very quickly, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then we can look on the rest of the passage. We see, so I have in the blue, we have highlighted, this is how Sylvia's responding to it, and then the yellow, more description of the tree. And this is just a way to help frame up your thoughts. The way, so she's moving to the tree, and it's harder to get to the tree. Now we're going to get some more understanding of maybe what this tree might represent. It's harder to get there than she thought, and she's laying her hands on, again, this is the third time we've used the word, the authors use the word great in reference to this tree. Well, now once she's on it, the tree seems to lengthen itself. That's really interesting now. The tree becomes personified. It's reaching up further, farther, and farther. It was like a great main mast to the voyaging earth, and it must have been amazed. The tree must have been amazed. So now this tree, it's like coming to life as she is on it. Now we have the character directly interacting with it. And we see that, she is climbing, she's creeping and climbing higher and higher. And it describes her. We have this contrast again, this great tree, 3 times. It's great, it's very large. And then her, we notice light, weak, this light, this weak, this little creature making her way up the great tree. I love this next sentence. The old pine must have loved his new dependent. So now we see, this tree really like being for her, wanting this for her. She's always looked up wistfully. She's dreamed of this. And now the tree is glad that that she's there. And then the tree finally stands still and holds away the wind, so she can climb up and look. So we see their interaction, and now we have more knowledge of maybe what this tree represents. So let's look at our questions that we're thinking about. What's the object? The great pine. And we talked about all of these descriptions, and we talked through, the character Sylvia's response to that. So what might this tree represent? Well, this tree could represent a new perspective, a different way of viewing the world. It could represent knowledge. She is now, by climbing this tree, by moving up, she's acquiring all of this new knowledge. And what controlling idea could this connect to? It's a coming of age. She is maturing. The more knowledge she gains, the more perspective she has of the world, like we talked about earlier, and the setting just totally reinforces this. She's coming from the middle of the forest where it's hard to see everything, and now she's climbing up, and she has this whole perspective looking over the sea. That brings about maturity in her, and it could represent and reinforce some coming of age ideas in this story. I love this passage. Okay, so let's do a quick check for understanding. This is a very short passage from The Open Boat, a short story. So let's look at this and ask the same questions. None of them knew the color of the sky. Their eyes glanced level and were fastened upon the waves that swept toward them. These waves were of the hue of slate, save for the tops, which were of foaming white, and all of the men knew the colors of the sea. The horizon narrowed and widened and dipped and rose, and at times its edge was jagged with waves that seemed to thrust up in points like rocks. Many a man ought to have a bathtub larger than the boat which here rode upon the sea. These waves were most wrongfully and barbarously abrupt and tall, and each froth top was a problem in a small boat navigation. So already we see there's so much attention given to the waves and so much description given to the waves that we know they're probably representing something. So if we go through the questions with this, we see the waves, we've highlighted some of the ways that they're described. They're foaming at the top, they're jagged, pointy, abrupt, and tall. So we have this really harsh diction that's used to describe them. And here, the questions we had were, what are the characters' response? And at this point in the passage, we don't have a character introduced, but we do have these large waves kind of juxtaposed with a small boat. I think that contrast, again, the contrast, the big and the small. So we have this small boat later, if you read on with the text, but you would see the characters, but we can see this small boat and assume, there are people in the small boat. What might the waves represent? Danger. And then what controlling idea? If you went on and read further in this text, you would be able to make this connection to a controlling idea.
And the fact that the characters aren't there, I think, is significant in and of itself. If we're, I'm trying to forget the rest of the story, right? We have an advantage here, but if we just look at this, the fact that these waves are so so powerful, so large, so looming over the boat, and then there's just a boat, and we can see it as, well, there is no character here, but of course there's a character, right? So someone must be on that boat. But if the boat is small, how much smaller is the person in the boat? And I think the fact that they're not given any mention here makes them that much smaller, even, at least at that moment, in that description of setting.
Exactly. And I think, even if we haven't read on into the story, we can even think just because the small boat is recognized and characters aren't emphasized, just that nature is large and powerful and domineering in
Absolutely.
this one paragraph.
So, what are the key questions? Whenever we're looking at symbol, we're trying to, first and foremost, we have to identify the symbol, right? We're not trying to say that identification is wrong. We're saying that identification is not the end all. So, we have to understand which object is functioning as a symbol, right? And then try to get at what are the multiple ideas or concepts that they might represent. And ultimately, how do these symbols function to inform our understanding of the passage as a whole?
Mhm.
Again, this is something we can apply to a novel as a whole, but for question two, we obviously have an excerpt unless you have a full short story. But we're still going to talk about within the confines, within the parameters of this question, how does this symbol function to illuminate the text, thereby allowing us to view deeper into the purposes that the author may have had for that text. So these questions are significant, and as we've always said, don't just take a picture of these and let them be. You should put them in your own words. And I could envision a chart, that I might be creating, where I put symbols in like 2 or 3 questions that are important, character, 2 or 3 questions that are important. And it's just a way for you to start recognizing the filters that you need to process a text through in order to arrive at interpretation. And for homework, we're doing Cherry Bomb, and this is a former question on the AP exam, and we expect you to read it, and we're being kind. You're not writing an essay, because it's not always about writing the essay. It's about
It's
going
about the
through the
thinking.
thinking. Absolutely, it's about going through the processes that could lead to a great essay, and you're gonna write plenty of essays in the weeks to come. But for today, you're gonna take this Cherry Bomb prompt and you're going to ask yourselves these questions, which are the same questions that we dealt with during the guided lesson and during the check for understanding portion, which is identify the object, start thinking about how it might interact with a character, how a character might interact with a symbol, and ultimately, what does that say about the representation or the significance of the symbol and the controlling idea of the text. So no essay for today, just deep thinking about setting. And as always, reach out to a friend who may not have a device or internet access. Complete the information when you visit that URL for them. And it's been a pleasure being with you all. We're going to update the map, and towards the end of the week, we're going to show where
It's getting
all the
crazy.
correspondences come from. Yeah,
It's getting
it's a lot.
crazy. So we are just, once again, just so thrilled to spend this time with y'all. We're so proud of the work that you're doing. I mean, we see it. We're hearing from you every day. Y'all are doing the work. So we're proud of you, but you should be proud of yourself too, because you're putting in the time and that is going to pay off. We're proud of you. Love you, seniors. See you tomorrow.